Hello War of the Visions fans, I'm Jackie Fox, and in this video I want to talk about healers in 2024 because healers have kind of been outdated in a lot of ways that we see with kind of these basic roles. The same thing often happens to tanks. Just being able to tank isn't enough. You need to be able to do a bunch of additional things. In addition to tanking, you've got to have now an aura to keep your allies safe, etc. etc. You got to be doing debuffs. You got to be protecting your team. You got to have good buffs. You got to have really good recovery options. Absolutely a requisite for tanks. So what we require of tanks has expanded a lot. But for healers, the same thing has happened, and it's pretty specific. And I think the biggest issue comes down to timing. Because timing your heals properly can be really critical. A healer that doesn't heal its allies before they go down and can't bring them back, but really any time that, your healer lets somebody down, your timing was generally the issue. It wasn't that they were out of heals, it wasn't necessarily that they didn't want to use them. It was that they either didn't have the CT or the spellcasting speed to be able to apply that healing when it was necessary. Now, there are still a lot of things that healers, and I mean, while I'm going to muddy the waters on what a healer is later in the video, speaking about more traditional healer types, there are definitely things that they can still do, even when this particular thing has been devalued. You might think that just pushing out large AoE heals and recovering your team is the only thing that healers are good for, but it's not. In fact, at the current moment in time, it's one of their least helpful abilities, asterisk. There's more to it than that. And the reason, as I said before, is timing. And that is because a lot of modern units have HP draining, which means that in a lot of cases, they can heal themselves as long as they can get back to their turn, as long as they can do significant damage. They'll be fine. They won't necessarily need a heal, or they won't need as big a heal. They might need to be topped off if they have good HP drain. So the type of heal that you want and the type of heal that you need and the timing of it becomes a little bit different. You want a heal that's able to top them off in between and help them be able to make it to that point that they can recover their own health, trying to keep them alive until they can do their own thing. You're basically trying to help these characters stabilize. And getting that timing is really important, because if your heals land too late, they've already healed themselves. It's not necessarily an issue for them, and I guess that's what happens if your heals come in too early. If your heals come in too early, then you've overhealed them, and they've probably already taken care of the issue before you could even get your spell to land, maybe, if your casting is slow enough. But if you're too late, they didn't make it to their turn, they didn't heal, you didn't heal them, and they got taken out. You failed as a healer. So healers, or characters that can function as healers, do things a bit differently. For one, a lot of the best modern heals aren't as much about the heal as they are about everything else, just in terms of healing spells. Looking at a single target example of this, we have Veritas of the Earth's recovery heal, which also applies like 3 or 4 buffs to him in addition to basically getting his HP back up to about 100%. This is pretty incredible. But it only really works for him. Looking at another modern healer, we have Summer Resnick, who with her specialty vision card gets another AoE heal that does this. And now while the timing issues for these, because they are regularly casted heals, as I've been talking about, a little bit down, the fact that they apply several other effects means that these heals are good for topping off or even fully recovering, but really what they're doing is they're hiding a new buff cycle into your moves. Because if you think about it, after their first couple of turns, most units, especially most DPS units, aren't really going to buff themselves anymore for the match outside of what they're going to do while they're attacking. Actually, I had somebody show up in the comments of a previous video and tell me the buff enhancement rate down wasn't all that great, or that it was just downright bad. But you discount both healers, who I think are probably the best example of this and being able to do this in an AoE, healer support type characters. But also there's a lot of characters that get crucial parts of their overall package, like, you know, various characters that get maybe slash attack resistance penetration or defense penetration, spirit penetration, magic attack resistance penetration, those things. They get the last part that they need for their kit out of their attack rotation. So lowering those things actually can be kind of impactful, and this is where these healers really shine, is being able to, when other characters wouldn't be buffing your entire party, they're buffing your entire party. So if the heal comes in too early, and no one really needs the extra HP, or needs it that badly, then it's a top off, or just a huge AoE buff, because the AoE patterns on these are really good, and because they're attached to a heal, your supports are going to be likely casting them mid-game anytime somebody starts to lose HP, even if they can deal with that themselves. And often this just makes a good backup plan. But it's also very proactive. The other thing that a lot of modern healers are doing in relation to timing is finding ways to give heals that haven't quite activated yet, right? One example of this that goes way back is being able to cast AoE regen, because putting this effect on multiple characters means that you're essentially healing themselves for 10% HP for the next 3 turns. It's a pretty small heal overall, but you're healing them maybe before they need it. And if it's early enough in your buff rotation, you may actually waste a couple turns of heals against anybody but a really long-range team. So it can have its drawbacks. But this is also a status effect that is very often worked into those mid-combat rotations. It's often on a tank's LB or something, for instance. So that in the middle of the fight, when it's more impactful, they can go ahead and preload a heal. So if you can give characters regen, that's a good way of healing them in advance. It's even more impactful if you can do it in the middle of combat. So when you have a heal with regen attached, like Chakra for the lowly monk was upgraded to, this is kind of an awkward skill to use, but when it goes off, it's both a big heal for everyone around you, and also it will continue to heal them for 3 turns afterwards. So you're kind of guaranteeing that this is only going to be used after someone needs a heal, so it's going to be in the middle of combat, and it's going to make the most use of each one of those turns. Even better than that, though, is giving people threshold heals, because this kind of ensures that no matter when they need that extra HP, when they hit that critical threshold, the heal will be there waiting for them. You have essentially healed them in advance, or kind of sent a heal forward in time to land at a perfectly opportune moment. This is kind of the best of what healers can do at the moment. Which brings me to an interesting question. In terms of this, while I definitely wouldn't class it as his main attribute, he's absolutely a DPS. But could you consider, through these metrics, Sodley the Wayfaring Priest to be a form of modern healer? I mean, if you played old Sodley right, you could keep him in the back row. This isn't, when I say right, I'm just saying to get this to happen, not saying that this is the best way to use him necessarily. But you could keep him in the back row, and his devout sub-job could easily keep pumping out buffs and heals on a single target basis through Law of Invigoration. And this heal kind of has that first group of things I was talking about, except that it's not a single target. So that's kind of been power crept by things by Summer Resnick now. So he could kind of function as a healer. But to me, Sodley the Wayfaring Priest does it in two specific and interesting ways. He doesn't give people thresholds, necessarily. He does have some thresholds for himself, which are going to help his timing, and we'll talk about that in a second. But he does give people the ability to drain HP for multiple turns, which essentially modernizes a lot of characters. And for modern characters who weren't balanced around having HP drain, like Ashe and Mont, it can kind of make them go a little over the top, shall we say. And this can give them really reliable heals. And again, Ashe and Mont is a character who, if you give him a blood sword, he has a threshold heal already, so he already has his perfectly timed heal. He has courage to back all this stuff up. He has a lot of healing potential, but this just really ensures that he's going to do well. This is, for a highly offensive and maybe even rushy type composition that's not slotting a very traditional healer, for a team that's going to go all out, this can be a really good way to land a heal across your team. And be able to do that consistently, turn after turn, by healing them in advance, by giving them HP drain. But suddenly gets even better. And I know I compared this effect, I believe it is the sequence of Illuminate the Darkness, which is just a really great skill. It's a good evasion support skill as well as recovery skill because of its sequence effect. So if they were having trouble hitting you and taking your HP down slowly, you can kind of recover them a lot and get them up to full, while also making it even harder to pursue that strategy with blind. And that follow-up heal reminds me a lot of healers like even Yuna from First Anniversary times. Because she had the effect Prey, which would heal in a diamond around her, and unless she had a lot of her attacking skills turned off and wasn't somehow aggroed, she would be pretty good about running in between people in combat and casting the skill and basically healing everyone around her instantly. And while this wasn't as big a heal for her, it was something that she could amplify with her own healing power up, and it was also something that was instantaneous as opposed to all of her more traditional heals, which definitely were not. This helped her have better timing than certain other healers of the time. And this skill proved to be pretty effective. Sadly here brings us a much more offensive version of this that is maybe even more reliably usable in combat, because not only is it attached to a good attack, but it's probably the best non-limit burst attack in his kit. So it's one that he's really going to want to use a lot, which means that quite often when he's not finishing somebody off, he's going to be healing everyone around him, whether they needed it or not. But for a character that I just attempted to call a healer, this is a pretty narrow package of heals, and by themselves, neither of the heals are necessarily huge. I mean, the right character can definitely make a lot of use of HP drain. And especially with this coming with Maneater, this really encourages you to run solidly with your biggest damage characters to maximize their own healing. Their best defense becomes your best offense. And in a composition and in a strategy like that, while a healer might be helpful, of course, there really isn't room for one. Because you're trying to burn your opponent as quickly as possible. You're trying to set their whole side of the field afire before they can even get started on you. But, a consequence of a lot of modern matchups is you have to be able to sustain through some real shenanigans to be able to take somebody down. And this particular type of healing is not only pretty well timed in that he's fairly reliably going to heal during combat, while also inflicting statuses on your opponent that might make it a little bit easier for you to deal with their damage if they miss you more often. While also just being a big hard-hitting attack. I mean, maybe taking some of them off the board too. Usually, when your healer recovers your whole team, they don't wipe out an opponent too. So that's... I mean, really, that just makes him the exact type of healer that a team like this needs. And the way that he interacts with both of these two elements really means that he has, maybe at kind of a bare minimum, the two things that a modern healer really needs. And this shows you how far our expectations of healers have really changed from where they were. I mean, again, he doesn't have the AoE heals with buffs, so I guess that part of a modern healer package he is missing. But there is a fourth piece that he does still have that I haven't discussed yet, and that is some way of dealing with curse. Now for him, he does it through resistance. You're not going to curse softly, which is super important for him because he's going to try to heal himself and others like constantly. It's, other than being a DPS, this is kind of his thing. So him being uncursed is pretty important, and he very easily avoids this status ailment. Other healers, like, let's say Lotus Mage Fina, who, for a number of reasons, she has the big AoE buff heals, which is a thing that she kind of already had even in her MR form once she was upgraded. So I'm glad to see that, and I'm glad to say that you know, she has that mid-game buff rotation / healing set, which is something we look for in modern healers. But she doesn't really have heal timing. Other than that, and one other factor, she is in a lot of ways a more traditional type healer, which is okay, it makes sense for her. She's meant to be a little simple in some ways. But her LB uniquely dispels curse before applying its heal, which is also important. She's one of the few ways that you can, while doing other great and beneficial things, again, AoE heal with all sorts of buffs on it, she can also remove curse, which would be the one thing that would really prevent your characters from being healed. So it has really good counterplay, at least for that one move, which is unfortunately her limit burst, which means she can only use it once, which means that her ability to consistently counterplay these teams multiple times in guild battle, or her ability to counterplay characters like Ramada the Astrolancer, who could potentially curse multiple times during a fight, is a little bit more limited. Then you have Summer Resnick, who has a curse resistance aura, and at least at the current moment, I know I've spoken highly of this. I know other people have spoken highly of this aspect of her, and it is really cool and it is really unique until you realize A, the way that auras work, and B, the characters in the game that have curse. Because, frankly, this aura doesn't work on any of them that well. Sure, potentially, I think it could work on Sephiroth in the late game, and she is good at sustaining into the late game. However, he tends to use his LB early game, and that could definitely be a problem for this. And I say that because he has a buff in his rotation that as long as you get it on him before he lands his LB will have added to it remove all buffs, which will fully negate the aura. So at least in the early game, Sephiroth is going to ignore her aura. As long as your Veritas of the Frost is awakened to level 107, he's going to remove all buffs on his curse skill as well, and he doesn't need any setup. He's just always going to do it. So he's going to ignore that. Arguably, this counters Ramada a lot better unless her special clause lines up, because if they have protect or they have courage, I honestly don't care how much of a rate of curse resistance because if Ramada lines up with one of those two status ailments, I think you need full nullification to actually avoid being cursed, because she should have a 225% chance of applying the status, and you're not getting away from that one. So, I guess technically she could mess with Sephiroth, potentially, if he waits really late to use his LB, which isn't super likely. But yeah, for these other two characters, the way that they work kind of invalidate her too. Maybe there's a future unit that doesn't have such a good chance of either applying curse in the way that Ramada does in very specific scenarios, or doesn't have the ability to run remove all buffs on all of their attacks, release all of their curse skills. Sorry, that rant has been building up inside of me for a long time. But in theory, this is definitely a cool way for a healer to interact with curse, although I do also want to point out that this is definitely a back row unit, and I'm not sure how consistently she's even within aura range of the other characters on your team, and if she is, that could be a problem because you don't necessarily want her taking AoE damage. I don't know. Anyways, moving on to Luciel. Luciel has the ability to re-raise, which is like casting a really weak raise way ahead of time. This has been one of the premier ways to heal someone in advance that we've seen since, I think, for at least a couple of people, even before Yuna, but that's kind of when I started playing. So she's the first re-raise character that I really remember. But she also follows that up by being able to give you threshold heals, too, which is also a thing that Summer Resonant can do, although I would say that Luciel's are higher in potency, and that could be helpful. Now, I guess technically, this also means that from this perspective, there's at least a number of other characters that check at least one or so of the boxes for healer. Like characters that you might not think about. For instance, this potentially makes Addison Rae somewhat of a healer. I mean, she has the ability to preload a heal on you and also give you the courage to back that up. But unfortunately, she doesn't really check any of the other boxes for what a healer should do. There's also Omnilus, interestingly enough, and I think that she could be pushed more in this direction, and I think that there are some healing aspects in her kit. I don't remember if she has Arithmetician or if she has the heals from that, and I don't think that she does, because I was worried about her being able to recover her own HP, although she's an offensive unit, so if she's taking damage, she's probably not going to heal herself necessarily, because she's going to be focused on taking that person out. But she does have the ability to give people threshold heals as well, and pretty big ones too. I'm honestly surprised that this aspect of her doesn't come up more often, but it's pretty strong if you can line it up right. TLDW for my WOTV fans out there. The old ways of healing are largely dead. And it was June the Spring Celestial and the abundance of characters that could both deal incredible amounts of damage while healing themselves at the same time, but also characters like Sephiroth and bringing the whole curse meta to us that have really changed our expectations of what a healer can do and when they should be able to do it. And if you're not used to looking at healers this way, then hey, welcome to 2024. I hoped I helped you figure out who might be a better healer for your team. Unfortunately, this means that maybe you don't have one yet. Or maybe this means that you can use some of these elements, much like I do with Soddly, and find a way to incorporate some of them into a more offensive and aggressive matchup. Although, admittedly, the two examples that I listed, and I'll give you a third, Resol, because she can also give HP drain much like Soddly, but also Omnilus and Addison Rae, you're not necessarily looking at the newest and best offensive threats here. Thank you so much to all of my new and returning players who are checking this out, and all of my diligent fans who watch all of my content. If you want to be like them, remember that the free-to-play option is to like and subscribe, and if you want to see all of the content and make sure that I don't accidentally drop a fox bomb and get a video delisted, ring that bell. But also, if you want to check me out on other channels all across the broader interwebs, click that link in the description, and that's going to give you access to even a smooth talking podcast, but also some books that I've written in fantasy, science fiction, and a near past cyberpunk genre as well. That's the trilogy that I'm working on right now, although I haven't had as much time to finish it up as I have previously. Definitely, if a couple of you start putting in some orders for this book, I will probably be able to find the time to finish up the final copy. So, if all of that is interesting, click the link in the description. And remember, also, comment, tell me what you're thinking, because this whole like new and returning player series, I need to know what you're having issues with or what you need help understanding as you're coming back, because I'm kind of blind to it. Like, I've been playing pretty consistently since about year one, so all of this kind of feels like second nature to me, and it's hard for me to identify the things that might be hard for you. So really, the first ideas that I've had are the things that have changed lately. The things that have changed maybe over the last 6 months, are the things that I would tell myself to look forward to and expect if I were talking to a version of myself maybe like 6 months ago. And this video is definitely a pretty good example of that. There was definitely a point where I thought that the whole concept of running healers on your team was absolutely dead within War of the Visions. And then we started getting new healers, and that was confusing. But I realized pretty quickly that these healers were healing in new and powerful ways. I still didn't think it was necessary though, but as we have gotten a more even playing field to where these self-healing characters aren't the only big and bad things on the field anymore, yeah, a healer can work. But you really need a specific type. Anyways, if you have any thoughts about future videos for this series, leave them in the comments. Let me know what you think, and also, even if you don't have any ideas, go down into the comments and like the ideas that you want to see. This is your way of voting for future ideas in this series, and if I see a comment that has a bunch of likes, then I'll know that you really want me to make that video. But with all that being said, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.